Hey guys, it's me, Alpha. I'm back. I know it's been a while, but I have something good for you. It's about learning. In this video, I'm just gonna teach you guys how to improve your learning. Very simple. It's going to involve a two-step algorithm. It's very complicated. It's just like 4 steps, basically. I really wanted to make this video because I've never been too satisfied with the way that schools teach you how to learn. And I'm sure that a lot of you know what I mean when I say this. But just telling students to have homework and go home and do it, and you learned everything, you're good, now take a test, and it's not helpful, is it? You cram the night before, and then afterwards you forget everything, and you have to relearn everything next year. It doesn't really make any sense, does it? But I'm very interested in this little thing called cognitive science. And with cognitive science, we can eliminate the cramming and all the bad habits that school teaches us, and instead use science to learn. So let me look at my script real quick. Basically, it's just taking advantage of your memory, which is your long-term memory, your short-term memory, and your working memory. What we're gonna try to do is get information that's in your working memory into your short-term memory and get it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. That's the main goal: memory, long-term memory consolidation. So, let me tell you how my algorithm works. There are 2 phases: your initial learning phase and then your revision phase. That's it. So when you're first learning something, you're going through the initial learning phase where you learn it for the first time. And then when you're studying for it, when you're doing revision, doesn't matter. It's different for when you're in the States or in Europe. But let's say you're learning algebra, You'll first go through the initial learning phase, learn it, and then you'll consolidate it into your long-term memory with revision. So let's go through these techniques. Technique number 1 in the initial learning phase, we have proper note-taking. Now, I see a lot of schools saying you should type your notes. It's so much faster, it's so much easier. But that's the thing. They're right, it is very easy. But because it's easy, you don't get the same effect that writing with your hand, longhand, gets you. You see, there's something about the sensory input that you get from writing your notes and getting the information from whatever you're copying from into your working term memory and then writing it out and then going to the next line that actually helps you recall the information and learn it much better. In fact, this writing by hand is a form of active recall, which we will get into later in the video. Technique number 3, spoiler alert. But basically, write by hand. That's technique number 4. Technique number 2, chunking. You might have heard of this. Some of you big backs might have heard of this too. It's basically just breaking down a complex subject into more simpler chunks. For example, let's say you're learning your shapes, right? Now, you could just look at geometry as a way of being like, whoa, that is so much, it's too complicated for me. It's not. You just have to break it down into simpler chunks. Like round shapes could be a category, a chunk of the subject. Then you have shapes with vertices, that could be another chunk. And suddenly this complex subject is just a bunch of little parts you can take little by little, and suddenly you've learned the entire complex subject. So your brain is basically a stomach, and you're biting into the hamburger of knowledge and slowly digesting it, learning it. And that's the initial learning phase. That's it, those 2 strategies. Then we go on to the revision phase, which is you've just learned it, right? Now you're studying. So technique number 3 is active recall. This is the king of learning. You see this in every video on learning and cognitive science. Active recall, active recall, active recall. Basically, it's just summoning, the memory, summoning the information that you've actually learned. So let's go back to the shapes example. So I first learned about my shapes. Now I'm gonna take the information of shapes in my head and I'm gonna apply it to something else, like a test. This is a very, very good way to use active recall. Let's say you're studying for algebra. We'll use that example again. To use active recall to study, we're not just gonna review what algebra is again, like, oh yeah, that's how you add. No. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get a practice test or exam, and we're gonna do practice questions. We're summoning the information we've learned and actually using it. So let's go to a weird field. Let's say it's astrology, right? So instead of just reviewing that fact in the textbook that, oh, Earth is the 3rd planet from the sun. I have no idea if that's true or not. I don't know anything about planets. But then you'll take a test. And then the question will ask you, what's the 3rd planet from the sun? And you're summoning the information from your head to answer that question, Earth. And something about doing that strengthens the neural pathways of how, I like to say it as, from your memory stores in your brain to your mouth or your hands, to actually writing that into the physical world. It shows that you actually know the information. I mean, think about it. In schools, how do they test that you know something? They give you a test. So the best way to improve the scores you get on tests is to take tests. You know what I mean? Let's go on to our 4th technique. Technique number 4, spaced repetition. Now, I always like thinking about spaced repetition as a sort of formula, but it's really not that complicated. You just have to think of when you first learned something in terms of days after it, you know? So let's say, we'll go back to our shapes metaphor, our shapes example. You first learned shapes on day 0. That is the initial learning. Now you have to study. You're gonna study a day after. That's when you study. Then after that study session, 2 days after, you'll study again. Then 4 days after, you'll study again. Then 8 days after, you'll study again, so on and so forth. That's basically spaced repetition. Instead of studying every other day, like I'll study on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Sunday. No, that's a waste of time, in my opinion. Instead, you can actually look at how your brain works. You see, active recall is just a way of studying. But when you want to space out the studying, you need spaced repetition. And this, I think it goes with the curve called the Ebbinghaus curve. I'll put a link in the description. By the way, I will put a link to everything that I cited from in the description. But basically, this uses the Ebbinghaus curve, which is basically just this scientist graphed how fast you forget stuff. And it looks like this. You have your axes, and then you have first learning, and then it dips down immediately, drastically, at least in the first time you learn something. And then you'll review it again, and it will dip really fast, but not as fast as before. When I say dip really fast, I mean how much you know of the subject. Then after another study session, you will dip fast, but slower than you did the last 2 times. And over time, let's say 5, 6 study sessions, instead of dipping super fast like it did the first time you studied, it will dip much slowly. And that will show you that you're actually putting the information that you're learning into long-term memory. And basically, it's just a way to eliminate redundancy and make better use of your time. And that's all 4 techniques that you need to learn to study. I'm going to give one more example just because I know examples can be very helpful for people learning how to learn for the first time. and then I would like to say my thanks. So we're gonna use the example of arithmetic. Everybody knows arithmetic. Even kids know arithmetic. And by arithmetic, I mean addition, multiplication, subtraction, all that sort of stuff. So you're a kid, you're learning arithmetic for the first time, okay? To you, it might seem like arithmetic, that's a complicated word. I don't even know what's in arithmetic. So what you're first gonna do is you're gonna break down arithmetic. You're gonna put it into different chunks. Instead of arithmetic, the subject, you're gonna say, okay, addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division. These are 4 chunks out of that complex subject of arithmetic. Now, instead of learning everything, we can just learn addition, right? Then you're gonna take, when you're learning for the first time, you're gonna take notes by hand, and doing that will make it more efficient. Instead of just looking and hearing and remembering, you're actually using your hands and you're moving the information that you're learning into your working memory, writing it, then doing the same process over and over again. And you've learned it initially. Then you need to study it, because if you don't study it, you're just gonna forget it the next day. So, next day, you're gonna study addition, okay? Let me see. What can I use to study? Math. Practice exams. So, what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a textbook, or you're gonna get, you're gonna look up addition quizzes, or you're just gonna ask a friend to give you addition problems, and you're just gonna solve them. That's your study, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. 3 plus 3 is 6. 3 plus 4 is 7, so on and so forth. I really hope I did not get one of those addition problems wrong. That would suck. Anyway, and then you're done with studying. And you can look at what you did wrong, and now be like, okay, next time I study, I should learn these specific things. And how do you determine the next time you study? Instead of having one day after the study session, it will be 2. So now, in those 2 days between the study sessions, you can study something else. You have a certain amount of time before you reach a threshold that you need to study again. And by the way, to determine how long you should take between study sessions, I usually like using doubling, which is basically just 1 times 2, then 2 times 2, then 4 times 2, then 8 times 2, then 16 times 2 and over, and so on and so forth. Basically, it's just powers of 2. But if you're fancy, you can use the Fibonacci sequence, which is, I think, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, so on and so forth. And then suddenly, you know addition. You've memorized, you've put into your long-term memory addition. And then you can move on to multiplication. Then you can move on to subtraction. Then you can move on to division. And suddenly you've learned the entire subject of arithmetic just by using my techniques. Yeah, that's it for the video, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope that using these techniques will improve the way that you learn. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching. Bye.